Hello biscuits! It's Cupcake Kami-sama back here and welcome to another video. Whilst Lolita fashion is more than just the clothes, even though it's primarily the clothes because, you know, fashion, like any fashion, it also has a whole bunch of printed media. It's also one of those rare fashions that has rules. And those rules tend to intimidate a lot of people, especially new ones coming into it. Because how on earth can I absorb all of this? I just want to look cute like the rest of you. How can I learn all the rules? And obviously there's a whole bunch of different resources for it. But now there is one that combines the two, combines the knowledge that people crave with the printed media that our hoarder hearts yearn for. We now have our very own dictionary. So this is the dictionary of Gothic and Lolita. It has been put together primarily by Suzuki Mariko, who used to be an editor of Gothic and Lolita Bible, in collaboration with a whole bunch of other people. As you can see from the little insert on the cover, a model Aoki Misako has contributed things, as well as Mana of Malice Misère, who is most known in our community for Moi-même Moitié, even though I'm not sure what his involvement with it is right now because I'm not very goth, but anyway. This is an actual dictionary. Yes, even though there's a title right here in English underneath the Japanese, it is entirely in Japanese. That being said, seeing as the language isn't a problem for me, most people who will get it just because, oh my gosh, Lolita media, like I need to have it and have it as a collector's item. I am extremely interested to see how this functions as an actual dictionary. I've only had a very quick flick through this, so I know a couple of things that are in there, but I'm basically going to test this right now by coming up with some questions or things that a new Lolita might want to look up and direct myself to the appropriate part of this to see how easy it is to search for, but also how well it works as a dictionary. Now I'm going to have to potentially correct myself if I'm wrong here, but the English title is basically directly translated from the Japanese. The Japanese reads Goshiku and Lolita go jiten. Now I'm pretty sure jiten refers only to dictionaries. That being said, given what I've glanced in this book from literally just doing this, it seems to work as a dictionary as well as more like a reference book, where, or maybe as like an encyclopedia, where it's not just the meaning of the word that explains, but a little bit about its history and origins and some related searches and stuff like this. So, without rambling on any further, let's get into this and see whether this is just a novelty or whether this is actually usable as a valid learning resource. For the purposes of not ruining the pretty dust covers, let me remove those. As you can tell, even underneath the dust covers, the book is beautifully printed, but now it's a lot easier to manage. So, let's come up with some ways in which a new Lolita might either learn about the fashion and, you know, she's going off to the library and picks up a dictionary to learn more. What would be the things that she'd look up? I think the first one, assuming we're going with a scenario of someone completely brand new to the world, let's look up Lolita or Lolita fashion in itself. Now again, because this is in Japanese, sometimes I will have to do a bit of on-the-spot translations to make sure that I'm looking up in the correct places. Because even though this is alphabetized like any other Japanese dictionary would be, in that it follows the lines of hiragana, you know, a, sa, ka, sa, ta. And some of these words, you know, Lolita you'd expect to look up on the L, but the Japanese call it Lolita. So we're gonna have to go to the la line. Okay. The very first entry is for Lolita Aikosha, so a lover of Lolita. But There's a couple of other ones. Oh my gosh, there's a whole bunch of different terms that even I did not realize that the Japanese used in reference to Lolita, but let's stick to the topic at hand. Don't get distracted. Interestingly, the entry here for Lolita itself seems to be more concerned with an album from 1998. Sorry, with a song that's on an album from 1998, and it references the femme fatale. I hate that, but let's not get into that rabbit hole with that westernized side of Lolita, which makes sense because apparently it's by some German artist. There isn't anything explicitly relating to the fashion under here. We've had the Lolita Aikosha, so the lover of Lolita, and that one does say it's about the people who love this fashion. Enthusiasts, I guess we'd say. But there's nothing under at all. There's an entry explaining some of the different spellings in Japanese of Lolita, mainly trying to distinguish it from the unsavory part, but nothing in here. That being said, let's quickly skip to the beginning, because the beginning does have the fashion chronicle going back as far as the 18th century Rococo, and it kind of explains some of the fashion evolutions and trends that have led to Lolita becoming what it is now up to the 90s, and after that it sort of starts splitting itself into Gothic and Sweet and Classic and Oji, and then there's separate entries for Goth because this is Gothic and Lolita Dictionary. There's a section entirely on the origins on the term Goth Loli. Gothic Lolita interview, that's with Mihara Mitsukazu, one of the early illustrators of Gothic and Lolita Bible. There's one with Mana, an entire section about lace, and then it goes straight into it. So it seems like the dictionary already assumes that you wouldn't need to look up the Lolita fashion in itself. That tells us this is aimed at beginners, but not total newcomers. This is not your book that when you go, I'm sorry, you just said Lolita fashion, what's that? That you hand them over and go, look it up yourself. This is very much like, I already know that Lolita fashion is a thing. I want to understand more. So let's presume that someone's picked this book up, saw all the beautiful covers and the insert and thought, who's Aoki Misako? That is definitely something that should be in here, especially given that she's listed as a contributor and a promoter for it. So we need to go to A, and there she is right on the first page of A. Aoki Misako, you have her date of birth and where she was born, which is Chiba Prefecture in 1983, in case you ever wondered, even though Misako is very open about her age. So this would then tell you that having debuted in 2001 in Kera magazine as a reader model, she became a working Lolita model, has been a pop culture ambassador, a kawaii taishi, mentions a couple of things that she's collaborated on and number of followers and where she's been, and then at the end says related searches. Okay, so this is very much working like an encyclopedia or a dictionary where it goes, related words you might also wish to look up, and it goes Midomisa Nikoichi and Lolita Tanka. So it works in that sense. We've looked up who Misako Aoki is and now know she's a model. And it's telling us you might also be interested in Midomisa Nikoichi. So let's try that. Let's follow what the dictionary is telling us. And again, someone like myself who's been in this fashion for a while and follows things would immediately recognize Midomisa as the portmanteau of Midori and Misako. Midori being another Lolita fashion model, but we are fully in the mindset of someone who's new and they're just gone, Midomisa, what? Oh, and I've just found it. So the entry for Midomisa Nikoichi does tell us that they are both models, gives us their full names, Aoki Misako and Fukasawa Midori, and mentions that they're both started out as reader models and lists when. So I guess in that sense, it's copying over some of the original entry just to give you the bare basics in case this is the first one that you've looked up. And then it basically says that over the years, their positions as top 2 models in the Lolita fashion world hasn't really changed. And because they work together quite frequently, they have been dubbed as Midomi-san Koichi, including at advertising photo shoots. And then it kind of goes in to say that it's an example of friendships amongst Lolitas that forms irrespective of their age gaps. The reference entry there you should also look up next leads us to Ochakai, which is tea party. So we've started out with the who, we've now learned another who, and now it's taking us to a what and a little bit more into Lolita culture as experienced by anyone, and not just here's me, a regular person looking at a professional model. Out of curiosity, I will very quickly look up Ochakai just to see what they say, but I'm not going to dwell on that. I have noticed some interesting things as I was looking up Midomi-san Koichi, in that on the page next over, it's talking about the Jean-Paul Gaultier bullet bras, and there's an entry for Marilyn Manson, and it stopped me for a second, but then I remembered this is for Gothic and for Lolita, which I guess in those respects the 2 entries make sense. Marilyn Manson more for the goth side, and the Jean-Paul Gaultier probably as a general fashion evolution thing, but again mostly aimed at Gothic. So let's quickly skip to Ochakai. Ooh, Oscar Wilde. The range of entries in here, kind of every time I flick through it, amazes me a little bit, because these are things that I probably wouldn't have thought of including. That being said, I am not the newbie that I'm now pretending to be for the sake of the video, as well as I've not been raised in Japan. I've been brought up and live in Europe, so some of these figures are more expected of me to know. Like, someone who claims to be educated and lives in Britain should at least be aware who Oscar Wilde was. You might not know any of his works, but you should be aware that he was a playwright, a writer, a poet, all of the above. Whereas someone in Japan, you'd give them more grace for not knowing that, because they have their own literary canon to concern themselves with. So it is interesting to see the extent to which this dictionary is going to bring you everything they could possibly think of that may relate, however tangentially, to Gothic and Lolita cultures. There we go, the Ochakai. Interesting. I think this is quite a neat entry. Not necessarily for the entry itself, but for the sorts of things it introduces its readers to. Again, we're assuming we know nothing about Lolita fashion culture, that we're new, and so new that we need a dictionary / a reference book to look things up. So it does say that in Japanese, what's called an ochakai, a tea party, comes from a tradition of afternoon tea that's been brought over from Europe and has become quite popular in Japan in recent years. It mentions that brands would have hosted tea parties, and specifically mentions that from around 1998, Manifestage Métamorphose ton défi, or Meta as we know it affectionately, has begun to spread the idea of tea parties across Japan and within Lolita culture, which got then picked up by Marui One Shinjuku department store shopping center, however you want to call it, in around 2000. It mentions that they might often have a guest, and again mentions Fukasa Midori and Aoki Misako, but also goes to say that this is just an occasion for friends to hang out, enjoy each other's company, and participate in Lolita fashion as a sort of culture. It's a chance to get to know one another and meet up more regularly. And ends to say that presently Angelic Pretty tends to throw such elaborate ochakais, tea parties, that they are taking over a whole hotel, that it includes a fashion show and even has guests or attendees coming over from overseas. So it is very much giving you a big picture in a small dose. Every sentence kind of introduces a new concept or new thought that links into the entry of tea party. So you have what it is, roughly how it started, who's involved, what it looks like now, what's it for, all in a paragraph about yay big. Oh my gosh. every time I flick through an entry, I then, glance over to the other page or something catches my eye and I see, what is this entry? Like, around Ochakai, then we have like letter writing sets, and on the page opposite, there's Ophelia from Hamlet, there's Off Shoulder as a neckline, there's the Eternita magazine, which I think only had one issue. Absolutely fascinating. So, let's get back on track. What else could a new Lolita potentially want to look up? Here's an idea. We've kind of gotten ourselves introduced more in like the world around Lolita fashion, but we need to know about the clothes. Now, I've mentioned that there's a whole section on lace at the beginning, which I'm not really going to touch, but you might start to build your first coordinate and you sort of go, okay, well, I know what a jumper skirt is, because as a Japanese person, you would probably see them anyway. It's a common clothing item and a common way to refer to them. Well, you'd know about blouses and socks. Hang on, what is a bonnet? That might be something that you'd hear in passing and go, a bonnet, what is that? So let's find out. What is a bonnet? There we go, a bonnet. The very last entry before it skips over to the new letter. It helpfully includes some pictures, so immediately, if you wanted to, you could go bonnet and go, oh, it's this headpiece. And then I'm going to go out on a limb and assume this will tell us a little bit about its history, as well as to tell us that it's a headdress. Yeah, very first line mentions that it's a headdress. Or actually more specifically, it kind of calls it a hat. Like a typical Lolita hat, which it's not wrong, but it's not right either. But I guess, again, we're trying to introduce people to it. Let's not get too nitty-gritty about it. To call it a hat isn't entirely wrong. Mentions about the 19th century bonnets, which are the ones that Lolita ones are most inspired by. Mentions something about dolls in here to say that, you might have seen them on dolls. Again, I feel like had I been someone who's just like, I want to absorb knowledge as quickly as possible, I would look at an entry like this and go, ha, bonnet, it's a type of headwear. Okay, cool. Glance through all of these details and go, 19th century, it looks like this or that. Good to know. Next. It's more so for once you kind of already know and start thinking, well, hang on a moment. But what actually is a bonnet? Where did it come from that the rest of this entry would come in quite useful? And as I've been searching for things and glancing, I've noticed a couple of brands already be mentioned. As I'm looking at bonnet, next to it there's entries on Marble and Maxissimam. As I was searching for this, I also came across Hoshibako Works, which interestingly, this includes a link to Hoshibako Works, as it does for Maxissimam and Marble. So fair to assume that in an attempt to be as helpful and informative as possible, once you've been like, oh, what is this brand? Let me look it up here. It then directs you back to their shop to go, well, if you like them that much, maybe shop over here, shop direct. Now, anecdotally, skipping the whole part about a Lolita newbie, I have been told by people who've received their copies before, and I flicked through them, that there are no entries on Baby the Stars Shine Bright. And I feel like, on the one hand, I kind of get. My understanding of Lolita fashion in Japan is that it's a lot more territorial with brands, or like loyalist with brands, and that people will have the brands that they love and they'll kind of stick to them, and the rivalry between Angelic Pretty and Baby the Stars Shine Bright, the two biggest Lolita fashion brands, is a bit more real. That being said, from the point of view of an editor who by all means should be a more neutral figure, and I've not looked into who's necessarily funded the project, like whether Angelic Pretty have contributed legit money into making this dictionary happen and therefore could say, we want you to exclude this part. As an editor, I feel like you've gone to all these lengths to include a whole bunch of stuff that's only related on the very edges of the crux of the matter that is Lolita and Gothic fashions, and yet you're excluding this very, very big brand. I want to test that. Is there an entry on Baby the Stars Shine Bright? As if there's an entry on Bela Lugosi. Sorry, it was a complete side thing. Okay, it's not on the B, where I would have expected to find it, because that's how the Japanese spell it, B. But let's look on the Ba. Let's check the actual spelling in English. Oh, no, I've gone past it. I'm now on N. Okay, so here is everything under there. We're going to go through this one by one. I mean, I'm already past the Ba and it's not here. It's Physical Drop and Fairy Wish, but no Baby the Stars Shine Bright. Well, not So it seems that Baby as a brand does not have an entry. As I said, from the point of view of editing, of putting this together, seems a little bit odd. That being said, because we get to Fukasawa Midori, an entry on the model, it literally opens with saying that she was originally a model for Baby the Stars Shine Bright. So it's not that the dictionary is trying to completely erase any connection or past or mentions of Baby as a brand. And I have a feeling that had I been someone unfamiliar with the world, when I'd go, oh, I've heard of this person called Fukasawa Midori, let's look her up. And the first thing it tells me is she was a brand model for Baby the Stars Shine Bright. And yet there is no point within that to take me to look up stuff about Baby the Stars Shine Bright. It's just a little bit weird from that point of view. Again, if there's been money involved to say you can have one or the other, or like we will sponsor this if you don't talk about them, whatever, shady business, but it does put the reliability of the dictionary a little bit into question if you're willing to skip such a massive part of it. I'm now hellbent on looking up two other things. So first, let's see about Alice and the Pirates, because that is the sister brand of Baby the Stars Shine Bright. Algonquins, Enchanting, Angelic Pretty, as we've mentioned before, Alphonse Muha, Arthur Rimbaud, Ali Projects, Alice, nope, nothing about Alice and the Pirates. But there's one other person that we can look up to see whether this is just the entries, and that is Takemoto Nobara, the writer of Kamikaze Girls, which I'm sure this will tell us, but if I know that, if I have heard the name, I'm switching back to that persona, then I will want to look him up. Takemoto Nobara, the entry right here to say that he's a writer. He was born in 1968, talks about some of the works that he's done, Mishin, and mentions Shimotsuma Monogatari, so Kamikaze Girls, with that being highlighted in pink, where everything else in the entry is in black, which seems like the dictionary's other way of showing this has an entry of its own, so look that up. The entry at the end has, you might also wish to look up Lolita Bungakusha, Lolita literary people, but it doesn't mention Baby the Stars Shine Bright. Now, this could be because at one point the brand kind of cut ties with him, but it could also be because the dictionary is making an effort. One final test for the baby thing. Few things are more iconically Lolita than Usakumiya's. I will check whether the dictionary includes Usakumiya as a separate entry, but if it doesn't, I will try to find plush bags or an entry for something like this to see what they've done there. But again, I feel like if Usakumiya is not in here, given that this is very much something that, whilst the Japanese speaker would work out, like a bunny bear, what? But they would still want to know what said bunny bear is. to have nothing to point them in that puts the reliability of the dictionary and the usability of the dictionary a little bit in question, because here you've gone to include so many things that I may not have even considered to include, and yet the things that are very much in front of me as part of the fashion aren't here. Well, choices. Okay, we are on Whitby Goth Festival, or more specifically Whitby. Go Whitby. Vintage, Kate Lolita, wingtop shoes, veils, wedding dress, nope, nothing for usakumias. Oh, what was a plush toy in Japanese? Nuigurumi, thank you. Here's Nabokov, can't escape him. Nuigurumi bag. There we go, plush bag. The picture is of a bear backpack, generic looking, can't recognize it as any specific bear in particular. Well, it's not exclusive to Lolita and beloved also by goths. There are plush toy backpack. Whilst originally there was just one type, they've expanded to be rucksacks in different kinds. The most popular one being bear, followed by bunny, but no mention of bunny bears. Interesting. I feel like this is the moment I should have brought out my china teacup just to have a pointed sip in the direction of the creators of this dictionary, because you have made some choices. One more thing that I'll try and look up before I'll wrap up my thoughts. I'm going to also assume that brands that may no longer be functioning will also be here, and even though they technically are still just about breathing, I am doing a quick lookup for Mary Magdalene. Oh, nothing about Mary Magdalene, it seems. Oh no, maybe. No, nothing about Mary Magdalene. What else is defunct? Let's check Black Peace now. Nothing for Black Peace now, it seems. And one last one. I think there was once upon a time a brand called Shotgun Wedding, which I know very little about. I just know that it existed because with a name like Shotgun Wedding, you kind of instantly become memorable. Shoujo manga, well, that makes absolute perfect sense. Shinjuku no Densetsu no Cafe. Okay, there's some businesses, but nothing about Shotgun Wedding. So it seems like the dictionary is trying to be current. We can safely assume from just these three, the dictionary is making an effort to include things that are available now. So even though of a dictionary or a reference book or an encyclopedia, I would expect an inclusion of some prominent brands that have had impact on the fashion and the culture for purposes of looking it up, because you might stumble upon something, Closet Child still every now and then gets items from all of these that a newbie could be like, oh, but what's this? I haven't heard of this brand. Let me look them up. I understand, because presumably they had a limit on how many things could have been included. It's still an interesting choice. So let's put this down now for a second, because I feel like these few searches and the various bits in between have given me a good enough idea of what this book is and who is it for. Is this a usable and workable dictionary? Yes. I would probably call it an encyclopedia rather than a dictionary, because a dictionary, as I said, is just concerned with explaining the words, whereas this goes a little bit further. You have a tiny bit of explanations as well as further suggested topics or entries to look up with some of these things. It's also doing more than just explaining the words by giving you links to brands if you're looking those up. Is this complete? Absolutely not. Ignoring the whole, oh, but here's some brands that no longer exist that would have been good to include. The fact that choices were made to cut out Baby the Stars Shine Bright and some of the incredibly iconic things that, they do and stand for and are still relevant to Lolita fashion and the community today. Whatever internal feuds you have over there, come on. You're either producing a learning resource or you're producing a marketing material. Maybe that's me being way too Western about it. I'm sorry if that's the case. Is this good for newbies? Yes, I'd say so. I think this is the sort of resource that when Lolitas tell beginners on the internet, do your own research, like look things up. Whatever questions you might have, it's already been talked about. This is kind of a thing that we'd love to be able to hand out. Because yes, there has been plenty said already throughout, the couple of decades of Lolita fashion existing and being online and being in English speaking parts of the internet, that any newcomer could look up. But the fact that you're jumping around from one place to another, having lost EGL Live Journal as a central space, does mean that in the age of attention span being only as long as a short TikTok video, asking people to do their own research when it involves having about 10 tabs open will only get the really dedicated ones in. To have something like this that is just one book, however incomplete and imperfect, if that is something that I could offer to a newbie and say, okay, I'm happy to sit down and chat with you. If this makes it easier, why don't you start here? I would love to have this. If there was an English version of this, I feel like every community would be obliged to have a copy. Purely for those meetups when we go, okay, we're going to teach some newbies some basics in a very accessible way. Here's your first library resource. This is a reference book. You do not take that out on loan. This stays in the library, but you can use this to find out anything that you could possibly want. And I do like that whilst, like any dictionary, this is alphabetized as you're flicking through it to search for the thing that you started off searching. Your brain is already doing the 10 tabs anyway, because you glance at something and go, but what about dragons? Why are dragons here? Let me put my hand in here whilst I'm going to the page that actually interests me, then I'll come back to it, even though after the entry that you've just looked up, you now have, oh damn it, but now I need to look up, Hoshibaka works. So you're doing that thing of, okay, I'm looking up dragons, but where's Hoshibaka works? Putting a bookmark there. I also feel like for anyone who bought this for the purpose of learning, or even for the purpose of teaching others, this would be a perfect thing to spend a couple of evenings through, going through every entry and placing bookmarks. Put those cute paper sticky ones in here so that you know, okay, when I'm talking about clothes, these are the bookmarks I'm looking for. Or when I'm talking about people, these are the bookmarks I'm looking for. I think this is an incredibly well put together resource that I wish was available in English. So to all the Japanese Lolitas who already have the advantage of just being able to go to the shop and ask the shop staff in there to say, I'm really interested in this fashion, but I don't know how to start. And they will literally put you head to toe in clothes and explain as they go along why they're choosing this. This is a fantastic thing. Well done to Suzuki Mariko and everyone else involved in putting this together. You have done a cracking job. Maybe do volume 2 with just like an addendum pamphlet with, here's the additional bonus content that wasn't in this. And for the rest of time, this book is probably just going to sit on my shelf because I am not a newbie and I'm unlikely to need this in that way. But when/if we do any kinds of meetups in my community to bring more resources to new Lolitas, to teach people, to make that information more accessible, I will be bringing that with me, and maybe I'll even include those bookmarks in there and people can just use the camera translate function on their phone with Google Translate. So on that note, thank you all so much for watching this video. I do hope that you've enjoyed it. If you've also bought a copy of this dictionary, then I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you haven't, then would you? If that was a thing that you were able to read or something that you were able to get your hands on, would you get that? And if so, why? In the meantime, plenty of resources about Lolita fashion that are online, that are free, whether that's YouTube, whether that's blog posts, doesn't even have to be my content, even though I have stuff like this. It's all out there. You just need to look for it. And sometimes all it takes is knowing just the first Google search, and as you go down the rabbit hole, the remaining 50 tabs kind of open themselves. So on that note, thank you again, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Bye!